Okay, so welcome to the class, everybody. And we are so honored today to have Diane joining us. Diane Bloomfield is from Jerusalem. She is a Torah teacher, a very beloved Torah teacher, actually, from our community. She hosts Shabbat classes and also online classes for a lot of learning. And Diane is a great friend of ours. Diane and I take a lot of walks, and we talk about God and the Bible all the time. So it's really wonderful to have her here to share the Jewish perspective of the Tisha B'Av. So the class is on Tisha B'Av, and I call it Exile in Between Covenant and the Reconciliation, just because the way that Tisha B'Av is positioned in the calendar. Why do we give these classes? So of course, now we have an organization called 10 Gentiles. It's a nonprofit in Israel. So why do we give these classes? Because I feel that Christians do not know Jewish people so well. So we're hoping that through these classes, Christians will get to know Jews better, because Jewish people are such an important part of actually our relationship with God, such an important part in the Bible and our relationship with God. So it is not trying to get Christians to do Jewish things. So if you all know me, you actually know that I am kind of against that, against Gentile Christians doing Jewish things. But that's a different topic for another time. So we want Christian to know Jewish people better. Let's see what else. In the end, we should have about 10 minutes for questions, for comments, for greetings, and everyone's welcome to stay on as long as you want. And I haven't seen a lot of you for a long time, so it will be wonderful to catch up. And we have a lot of material to cover today. So we have quite a bit of material to cover. So I will try to stay on schedule and try to speed up things. So first of all, I want to explain what is Tisha B'Av. And then Diane will help us to understand from a Jewish perspective, in terms of Jewish people's relationship to the land, temple, and God, what does Tisha B'Av mean to them? And what did the Jewish people lose through these events? And then I want to talk about actually the things that Jewish people gained, because I have lived in Israel among the Jewish people for about 10 years, very close in the community. And to me, they gained a lot of things in the exile. So I want to talk about that. And then also Tisha B'Av, between the covenant and the reconciliation. What does that mean? Then we'll talk about how Tisha B'Av is commemorated in Israel with a song. You all know that I love Jewish songs. And then why we Christians should care about it and what we can do. Okay, so Tisha B'Av. Tisha means ninth. Be is in, Av is a month. In the Bible, it's the 5th month in the Bible. So when you see the 5th month, it's nowadays we call it Av. Okay, normally it falls in the summer. And so because Jewish calendar is a lunar calendar, so it's so the holidays changes. And so this year it's July 30th. So it's next week, next Wednesday. So it's not it's not in the Bible, but the acts of Tisha B'Av is in the Bible. Because in the Bible, you'll see that they talk about the fasting in the 5th month. So that's basically the act that what Jewish people do on Tisha B'Av. So why is Tisha B'Av such a big thing, such a huge thing? Why it's a special day? So what happened on this day? So first of all, it goes all the way back to the 12 spies. If you recall, after they come out of Egypt, after Mount Sinai, that God went into a relationship with the Jewish people. What God promised to Abraham, your descendants will be my people and I will be their God. It happened at Mount Sinai. And then they're ready to go into the land. And Moses, they sent out 12 spies to check out the land. And then the spy came back with bad reports, not good reports. They were terrifying reports that terrified the people. And so if you do the math, so in the Bible, it doesn't say that this is the 9th of, the 5th month. But if you do the math, actually I have it if you're interested. It comes out to the 9th of the 5th month, 9th or 10th of the 5th month. And so in the Bible, in Numbers 14, it says that night after the Israelites heard the report from the spies, that night, all the members of the community raised their voice and wept aloud. And that they didn't want to go in. They didn't believe that the Lord will bring them in. So they were worried, they were terrified. And so the Lord says, your children will be shepherds here for 40 years, suffering for your unfaithfulness until the last of your bodies lies in the wilderness. And so we know only 2 went into the land. Joshua and Caleb went to land. All the rest of them died for the 40 years, wandering in the desert. And so that is the first disaster. Because of their unbelief, they were sent into the exile, into the desert. And then the second biblical event is the first temple was destroyed in Av in the 5th month. And this time the Bible actually gave the dates. In 2nd King and also in Jeremiah, 2nd King, it says, and in the 5th month, on the 7th day of the month, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, a servant of the king of the Babylon, came to Jerusalem, and he burned the house of the Lord and the king's house. So the first temple was burned down in the 5th month. So in the 1st King, it says the 7th day, and Jeremiah says it's the 10th day. So we can assume that it started maybe on the 7th and it burned all the way. So it's a very, very tragic time. And then Israel went into exile to Babylon for 70 years. And then the next one, it almost feels like it's not too long ago because we can still see the remnant of this second temple burning down in Jerusalem these days, right? You see in the picture, those rocks there are the rocks that the Roman soldiers pushed down to destroy the second temple. And Jesus in book of Luke talked about the temple when the people were admiring the temple, saying how the temple was adorned with beautiful stone with gifts dedicated to the Lord. Then Jesus said, these things which you see, the days will come in which not one stone shall be left upon another that shall not be thrown down. And they all thrown down. They were all thrown down. And that happened on 9th of Av, 70 AD. So it seems like the Lord has cut his relationship off with the people because the temple is where the worship happened, where the sacrifice happened, where the prayers happened, right? And so it seems that way that the Lord cut it off because of the sin, because of idol worship. Okay. Not only that, so the calamities keep going in the 5th month. Then comes to the crusade. Officially, it started on the 24th of Av, and the killing of Jews started. 10,000 Jews in its first month, and then the killing continued. As they reached Jerusalem, the description was that the blood went up to their knees, to the soldiers' knees. So the word crusade is a horrific word for the Jewish people. Unfortunately, many Christians do not know that, and they continue to use that word crusade, but it is a horrific thing for Jewish people. And then, so after the crusade, then we see the expulsion. Jews were expelled from England on 9th of Av in 1290. The big number you see, the 50-50, is the Jewish year. Starting from creation, that's how they count the calendar years. And then Jews were expelled from France on 10th of Av, and then expelled from Spain 7th of Av. And then it doesn't stop there, and we can continue. Germany entered World War I, and then the final solution was formally approved on 9th of Av in 1941. And the Treblinka, the deportation of Jews from Warsaw Ghetto, also 9th of Av, and a terrorist bombing in Buenos Aires, 10th of Av, and the most crazy, what happened in Israel actually in 2005, the disengagement from Gaza, where Israel give Gaza away. That happened on 10th of Av. So we can see that this is a disastrous day. Jewish people lost tremendously amount of relationship with God, the temple, and also their dignity in the sight of the nations. Now I will pass this to Diane. Diane can tell us what it means to Jewish people. We know that this is a fasting day in the Jewish community, not only in Israel, but all over the world. Many synagogues all over the world have been preparing for this day, for fasting. And so we know that among Jewish people, this is a tremendous time for reflection, for mourning, for fasting, for prayers, to go to the Lord in prayers. So I'll let Diane talk about this part so that you can have a perspective, a Jewish perspective.
Before I share the screen, I just want to begin by saying thank you, Shirley, and Bill. I see Bill there too, for this opportunity to get to talk to all of you. It's very exciting to me to get to share my love of the story that Shirley's talking about, my experience of the story. And I'm grateful for the miracle of having Shirley and Bill in our lives here in Jerusalem. They're completely precious in our community. And this is a really exciting and meaningful. And the fact that we're able to offer this right now, a few days before Tisha B'Av, which is Wednesday night, is just very meaningful. So I just am happy to see everybody tuning in. And I do want to speak about the story that Shirley began to present beautifully, is the story of all of the different, let's talk about the first two temples as the central beginnings of Tisha B'Av, as well as the story of the spies. They're all stories about the Jewish people and their land. The spies are about the Jewish people trying to come into their land that was promised to them by God, which we'll look at in a moment. And the story of the two temples are the story of the Jewish people living in their land for 500 years, each temple, approximately 400 to 500 years, and then being exiled. So they're really the deep story of the relationship of the Jewish people with the land of Israel and with the temple that was in the heart, the center of Jerusalem. So I did want to take this opportunity and speak about the relationship of Jewish people to the land of Israel and to the temple, And where does that story begin and how does it show up throughout the Bible, right? Throughout what we call the Bible, the Torah, the books of the prophets, the books of the writings. How does that story show up? So if we were all, learning together in the same place, we might have a discussion, but I will present some ideas, and afterwards, hopefully there's room for questions. And as Shirley said, anytime you want that you have a question, I'm very happy for you to stop me and ask a question if something isn't clear. So where does the story of the Jewish people and their land begin? Where's the first place that we see that there's a relationship to the land? So I'm going to now open up my text and we're going to look at it inside the Torah itself. Okay, let me just make sure I got my right text up. Okay, so Shirley, we have the text up now that has on the top Genesis 3:9. I want to just make sure that I have that up. Maybe Shirley, let me know. Unmute yourself.
Yes, you do.
Just let me know.
Yes,
okay,
we can see.
Sometimes it's not up. Okay, so
Yeah,
I see the text up. Okay, so what I want to do is look at the text that's on the screen and begin with the I brought the Hebrew. I don't know, maybe some of you have in your lives, or maybe some of you study Hebrew. I love Hebrew language. It carries a lot of the secrets, so I like to present it at least visually, but we really won't be studying from the Hebrew, except for 1 or 2 words, which I will share. But if we want to look at the beginning of the relationship of the people of Israel to the land of Israel, I'm going to start one place, and then I'm going to go back even farther. But the earliest clear story of the Jewish people in their land is the very first verse in the book of Genesis, in chapter 12, the first verse where God speaks to Avram, right? He wasn't yet called Abraham. He gets a name change. He's called Avram or Abram, so we'll call him Abram, but we can call him Abraham because that's how we know him. God speaks to Abraham and he says these words. He says, "Go forth from your native land and from your father's house to the land that I will show you." So here, this is the very first time we see God speaking to Abraham, who we'll see in the next verse is going to become the father of the Jewish people, who have a particular role in the world to bring a blessing to the world. And hopefully we'll get a little sense of what that blessing is in this presentation that I'm going to offer. But the first thing that God says when he speaks to Abraham is really a few things that are important here. But one, he says something that in English is translated as "go forth." But you have to understand that in Hebrew, it doesn't exactly say "go forth." It says something a little more intricate. It says, I'm going to say the words in Hebrew, and I circled it. It says, Lech lecha. Lech lecha, which means a lot of things, but one of the things it actually means is go to yourself. Go to your deepest self and the deepest purpose of why you're here. It's a journey to who you really are. So we lose that when we look at the English. We see it when we look at the Hebrew. So that's why I like to present some of the Hebrew, what I would call like deeper meanings or secrets. It says, go to yourself, go forth, go to who you really are, from where you've come from. We won't go into the details of that. And then it says, where are you going? You're going to the land that I will show you. That's how it's called. He's telling them to go to the land of Israel. It wasn't called Israel yet. It was called Canaan. The Canaanites were there. But God says, go to the land that I will show you. So it's a land, and there's questions. Why doesn't he say specifically the name of the land? Because there's an idea here that he's telling him, there's something that you need to see there. There's something that God, is going to show you. It's a place of divine revelation. That is said, that is hinted at in the very first verse. So the very first verse, which is really the beginning of the story of the Jewish people, because Abraham is the father of Isaac and Jacob and the Jewish people, God says to Abraham, you have a journey to go on. And guess what? That journey is in the land. It has to be in the land. That's the place where there's going to be divine revelation to you about why you're here and what your purpose is in creation. So the relationship of the Jewish people with the land of Israel is from the beginning. It's not a later addition. It's the essence of who we are and always has been. One idea I'm going to throw out, okay, just there, even our teachings in what we call the more mystical texts of Judaism that say it even began earlier than that, before God even created the world. This is what God had in mind. He had that one of the deep reasons for the world is going to be lived out through the Jewish people in their land. The Jewish people in their land was in God's mind, not just from the time of Abraham, but from the time of creation. So, we live in a world where there's not a lot of knowledge about history and not a lot of knowledge about perhaps deep biblical history, but it doesn't really take too much study to see that if we look at the beginning, where we see Israel already there. So the love affair and the essential connection between the Jewish people and the land of Israel and God is from the first verse of chapter 12 in Genesis. And then God tells Abraham, we'll read the rest of that section in English because this is also really important. Why did God want the Jewish people to be in the land of Israel? Because in God's wisdom, this is the way to bring blessing to the world. There is some connection that happens between God and creation when the Jewish people are in their land. And here he says it in verse 2 of chapter 12, God says, I will make of you a great nation. Great, by the way, does not mean number-wise. Jewish people have never been very big number-wise. We're actually really small number-wise. We're only 12 million right now, right? I think that's the current number, if I'm not mistaken. Shirley might know better than me. But we're not that many, and we never have been, and it's not necessarily what we're supposed to be. The word great here doesn't mean number-wise. It means great in our mission. It means there's something large that we're here to do. And this is what it is. He says, I will bless you. God says to Abraham, I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. So blessing, 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 blessing comes up in these verses 5 times. That's important. 5 is a good number. We don't have time to go into all of that, but it comes up 5 times. And then it says, this is where it gets really important for, I think, our coming together and learning. What does this have to do with the rest of the world, right? If Jewish people in the land of Israel are central in God's mind, is it just for the Jewish people? Are we here to receive some kind of divine blessing from God? No. That's what verse 3 says. It says, I will bless those who bless you and curse him that curses you. And all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you. It's really laid out in this very first opening prophecy from God to Moses, to Abraham, where he says, those who bless you, those who can join themselves to this relationship that I'm placing in creation from the beginning will be blessed. This is not just for the Jewish people. It's for all humanity. And those who don't, it's not going to look so good for them, right? And curse him, that curses you. It depends on the relationship to the people of Israel. And all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you. And there will be a great blessing to the world. So Judaism is a very particular people who are here to bring a very universal blessing. That's how it goes. But we need to be in our land to have that happen. The Torah, the Bible tells us, when God first says something, he's really saying there's a lot contained. So a lot is in this very first verse. In other words, this is what we need to study to understand the essence. But once we once we look at this, once God had said, you are going to, go to your land, and that's where you're going to have divine revelation. From that moment on, in the Bible, which is very early, there is nothing in the Bible, in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, all of the prophets, all of the writings, all of the books of the perhaps what you call the Old Testament, I don't know all the language, is about whether the children of Israel are in the land or out of the land. There's not anything that's irrelevant to that subject. So we'll look at a few of the verses and see you can open up the Bible in almost every place, and won't take you long to find out if we're in the land and how it's going in the land, or if we've been exiled and how we're trying to get back. The whole history of the Jewish people from this moment is about coming to the land, then sometimes being exiled from the land, and then coming back to the land. So let's look at a couple more verses here to just start seeing how that shows up. So I think for here I have to go to my next sheet. One second. One moment. I think it's here. Yeah. No, that was the same one that I just looked at. So I need to go to the next one. One second. I know what I have to do. Okay. So now I have up on the screen Genesis 13. So this is just a little bit later, just as an example, how the theme of being in the land is just everywhere in the Torah, in the Bible. And it says here in Genesis 13, verses 14 through 16, and the Lord said to Avram, he's still not called Abraham, after Lot had parted from him, raise your eyes and look out from where you are to the north and south, to the east and west, for I give all the land that you see to you and your offspring forever. Forever. This is where Shirley speaks a lot about this. This is essential in all of the teachings of the Bible, that this connection between God and the Jewish people, which is called a covenant, is not a temporary covenant. If the Torah says forever, it means forever. So he's saying this land that you see is yours and your children's, meaning this is for the children of Israel. So that's just another example of many, 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 many examples. Later on in the story of Abraham, he puts Abraham into a deep sleep, a deep prophetic sleep, and he prophesizes, he tells to Abraham that eventually, once Isaac is born and Jacob is born, the children of Israel, the 12 tribes, will go out of Israel, they will go into exile, they will go down into Egypt, and they will be slaves, but they will return from that slavery. So let's look at those verses just to ground ourselves in these texts. He says to Abraham, know that your offspring shall be strangers in a land not theirs, right? It was sort of open to how that would look. It ended up being Egypt, and they shall be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. That's the slavery, the famous slavery in Egypt, which was our first, really we got created in Egypt because that's where we really multiplied, but that's really our first major experience of exile out of the land, becoming a people. Then God says, but I will execute judgment on the nation they shall serve, and in the end they shall go free with great wealth. He says it's going to be a slavery, it's going to be an exile, but it's going to end. And he says to Abraham, as for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace, you shall be buried at a ripe old age, and they shall return here in the 4th generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. Shirley teaches a lot about that. I'm not going to touch that so much right now, but the promise here is very clear that the pattern of Jewish evolving history is one of exile and coming back to the land. So the story goes that Abraham came to the land after God told him to come to the land, and then he goes down, he himself goes to Egypt for a while, comes back to the land, just to give a little brief history, then Isaac, who's the first offspring, of course, the second of the patriarchs. Isaac was born in the land of Israel, never was allowed to leave the land of Israel. Isaac, who was the first offspring of Abraham and Sarah, he was the fulfillment of the promise that God made to them, that they would have a son, and he was never allowed to leave the land of Israel from his birth until his death. And he represents really the ultimate place of the people of Israel. Abraham and Jacob had experiences of exile, but Isaac never did. So that's a very important story. Then we get to Jacob, who of course had his problems with his brother Esau and had to run away, and he ran away back to Haran, back to his sort of where his grandfather came from, where the family was, and he ends up being in exile for 20 years, 20 or 22, I can't remember. He has his children there. All of the 12 tribes are born in exile except for Benjamin. The last one is born on the way back. So the 12 tribes are not born in Israel, but then they come back into the land. And then the children of Israel, the tribes of Israel, are in the land until the brothers sell Joseph, and then they go into Egypt. So a brief history of the Jewish people, right? We start with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the tribes. We go down to Egypt. We get out of Egypt, and as Shirley said, the distance between Egypt and Israel is only an 11-day walk. It's only an 11-day walk, but it took the Jewish people 40 years for deep spiritual reasons. But after 40 years, we got back into the land in the time of Joshua. In the time of Joshua, we got back into the land. And that really begins the story of all of the times of the kings and the prophets in the land. So what happened after quite a while in the land, it took about 300 or 400 years, we then built the first temple. So we have our relationship with the land from the beginning. And from the beginning, God says, I will make my name known there. You will find me there. And that place of really the deepest, holiest connection to God ends up being the temple in Jerusalem. So the first temple was built at around 1000 BCE, before the Common Era, BC. We say it different ways. I don't know how to say it, but 1000 previous to the time of the current counting. And that was the first temple. So for 500 years, the Jews were worshiping God in the first temple. And then the Babylonians came and exiled. First, the Assyrians came and exiled the 10 tribes. Those 10 tribes scattered around the world. They're prophesied to all come back, the 10 tribes. They're called the lost tribes. Some of them are being found. We pray for the finding of all the tribes. The last 2 tribes, the tribe of Judah and Benjamin, were exiled at the time of the second temple. Exiled at the destruction of the first temple. 586 BCE, 70 years later, the second temple is built. The second temple was destroyed in 70 AD, or CE, Common Era, however you say it. So that exile, which was the Roman exile, the Romans exiled, like Shirley showed the picture of those stones that fell from the destruction of the second temple, that happened 2,000 years ago. And for 2,000 years, the Jewish people were in exile. They were in exile. But what's really important to understand about that exile is that there was never a loss of longing to come back to the land. Every prayer, if you look through our prayer book, if you look through the prayers we say when we eat, I'll give one example. When we eat certain categories of food, we have a certain blessing that we say. Depending on what we eat, we have a different blessing. If we eat bread, we always pray after we eat bread, rebuild Jerusalem, God. Bring us back to Jerusalem, God. We said that for 2,000 years constantly. Anywhere that the Jews were in their 2,000-year dispersion, there was foremost in their mind was Jerusalem. We have beautiful teachings. If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its cunning, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth, if I do not put thee above my chiefest joy. So our 2,000 years in exile, we were disconnected and we were longing. I even interviewed a Jewish person from Ethiopia who ended up coming to Ethiopia in the 1980s when the Jews of Ethiopia started to return to the land. They're a very interesting story because they were very isolated. They didn't really know about the Jews in the rest of the world, but they kept to their faith. And I asked her and I said, what place did Israel have for you in Ethiopia? And she said, it was so central that when we were little children, if we did something wrong, like if we were bad kids, our mother or our father would say to us, you won't go to Jerusalem if you're bad. So it's not just in the prayers, it's in our culture. It's every wedding that a Jewish person has had for the past 2,000 years in exile. At the end of the wedding ceremony, they break a glass. Some of you may have seen that tradition. Why do they break a glass? Tradition has it, many reasons, but one is to mourn the destruction of Jerusalem and to remember that our joy is not complete until we're back in Jerusalem. So every time we eat bread, every time I eat a cookie, the prayer after eating a cookie for 2,000 years is, bring us up to Jerusalem. Let us eat from her fruit. Let us, enjoy her blessings. So exile was a very long chapter in the story of the Jewish people, but the prophets always taught that we will return. And you can imagine how much faith that took to believe that. How much faith after 2,000 years. My grandfather, right, who grew up in Poland and then moved to Canada and was a lover of Israel, he, as a child, would never have believed that his granddaughter would be living in Jerusalem in the state of Israel. It would have been just a prayer and a dream, but the fact that in 1948, well, let me just back up a little bit. So after 2,000 years of every prayer, every holiday, every Torah story, every occasion, having Jerusalem as our longing, and in the late 1800s, all over the world, Jews had always, by the way, individual Jews had always come back. You always had Jewish people here all through the 2,000 years. There was always brave souls who did incredible feats to get back here. But as a people, and the Jewish people are really a united people, as different as we are, we're very united in our souls. After 2,000 years, in the mid-1800s, a global, sort of inexplicable movement began, eventually called Zionism, because Zion is one of the names of Israel, which Jews started to come back in big numbers. All kinds of Jews from all kinds of places started to come back. And lots of history to learn, but in 1948, when after the Holocaust, where many of the soldiers in the War of Independence in Israel had come out of the concentration camps to Israel and became soldiers, in 1948, we gained sovereignty. The Jewish people gained sovereignty again after 2,000 years, and we came back to our land. And this is the beginning of what has been promised, of the final return of the Jewish people. It's prophesied that this is it. We don't have to leave again. This is our place. And now we're really here to go back to that first verse from Abraham and to say, we're not just here for ourselves. We're here so that we can be in Jerusalem and at the temple and bring God into the world. So I want to say just a few more words here about that, about the place of the temple, and because the holiday that we're going to commemorate through fasting and through chanting on Wednesday night and Thursday is in memory of all the things that Shirley said, right? All the things that happened to Jewish people because we're not living the life that we're meant to live, which is meant to be a life of blessing, and that life of blessing has to happen in the land of Israel. And so, what was I going to say? Something about, give me 1 second. So the heart of Tisha B'Av is really a longing for the time, not just of being in Israel, but of having the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, which stood for 1,000 years and now has been destroyed for 2,000 years. By the way, that I have understood, this is a side story, and then I want to talk about the temple. Many years ago, the Dalai Lama wrote Jewish people. He put out a call to different rabbis in the Jewish world, and he said, I would like to convene a meeting, and I would like for you to tell me what's the secret of the survival of the Jewish people in exile, because he's in exile and his people are in exile. So what's the secret of the survival of the Jewish people in exile? So he gathered Jewish people together from all types of Jewish practices to give him wisdom, because according to some of our friends, and Shirley and Bill and my friends, Alan, who's a great teacher of history of Israel, when the Jewish people went into their first exile in Babylonia in 586, before the Common Era, 586, 2,500 years ago, they returned, not all of them, but some of them returned to the land 70 years later and began to rebuild the temple. What Alan teaches is that was unprecedented in human history, that before that time, there was never a people that was exiled from their land and didn't assimilate and didn't disappear, because that was the reason people exiled other people. The reason the 10 tribes were exiled is because the Assyrians wanted them to lose their identity. Because when you're disconnected from your land, you lose your deep identity. And the miracle of the Jewish people is that they didn't. And that 70 years later, they came back and they built the second temple. And Alan stands at a particular place in Jerusalem and says, this wall is the most amazing thing in Israel, because this shows the resilience of the Jewish people and the miracle of the Jewish people. So the Jewish people had done something unprecedented. And after 2,000 years of living in every country in the world, with every language of the world, with every food of the world, with every culture of the world, we have come back together as a melting pot to come back to our purpose, which is to bring blessing to the world. So I want to just say one or two things about the temple, and then that's what I can share for today. So let me just turn to my third sheet here and get this up. So I just have to go like this and like this. Okay, so this is obviously, the temple stood for 1,000 years. It's a major center of Jewish celebration. 3 times a year, Jews from all over Israel at the time, and even those who didn't come back from Babylonia, they would come to the 3 pilgrimage festivals, which are Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot. So the temple was the center of vibrant Jewish gathering, of celebratory Jewish gathering, and of what's called sacrifice. But I don't really like to use the English word sacrifice, because in Hebrew, the word for sacrifice is korban. Okay, korban. The root of the word korban means to come close. It means to get closer. The whole idea of the entire temple service that was practiced for 1,000 years by the Jews of all around was to bring the world closer to God. That's the purpose of the temple. So some people don't know that, and they think it's just, what's the purpose of animal sacrifice? It doesn't seem like a very spiritual thing. It really was quite intense, right? There was body parts, and there was blood on the altar, and there was all kinds of things. But the deeper meaning of the sacrifice is hidden in the Hebrew, which was, this was the way that God taught us to bring not just the Jewish people, but all reality closer to God. Jerusalem is the place of connecting physical life to spiritual life. The word Jerusalem in Hebrew, it's a word because of the way it's written. Usually when a word ends with the sound im, like Yerushalayim in Hebrew, it means there's two of them. So the Hebrew word Yerushalayim, which is Jerusalem, hints that there's two. And what are the two Jerusalems? The earthly Jerusalem and the heavenly Jerusalem, the Jerusalem where God's presence is full. And the point of the whole time at the temple was to link upper worlds of God to created worlds of not just the Jewish people, but all creation. And at the time of the temple, it's understood that that was a manifest reality. Now, of course, if you study the book of Kings and you study the book of Judges, you see that the Jewish people are not perfect. They didn't do it always right. It's not like we were at our fullest expression of all this, but this is our purpose, and we're human beings, so we are getting there. But to understand, it's very important to understand why the temple is so important, because it's the link between heaven and earth for the world. So here's just 2 lines about it that a particular teacher that I teach a lot, and Shirley was saying, I teach here in Jerusalem. You're all invited if you come. You can come to the classes. I also teach online. You can come to my classes in Jerusalem as soon as the airplanes start flying again. This is from a 19th century rabbi from Poland who's known as the Sfat Emet, which means the language of truth. It's based on a verse from Proverbs, which says the language of truth will abide forever. So his teachings are called the language of truth. His name was Yehuda Aryeh Leib Alter, and he lived in the late 1900s in a town called Ger, Poland. And he says a lot about the temple, but I'm just going to share 2 ideas, just so we get a sense of why did we wait for 2,000 years to come back? So he says, because in the time of the temple, the children of Israel were elevating the worlds in actuality, really, something that is found now only in inwardness. By that he means prayer. So what he's saying is, our work was to take this, what we call often like a lower world, a physical world, a limited world, a created world, and to raise it up to its source, which is the creator. The creator is God, and God wants to be in relationship with his creation. And the temple was the place where it actually happened. It wasn't a theoretical possibility. It was a perceptible, experiential reality. And it brought great joy. It brought great joy. We're going to see that in a minute. And then one more line from Sfat Emet. He says, but it is God's will that Israel discover and raise up God's rule in all creatures. This is where we get back to Abraham's promise. The promise to Abraham. God says, you'll be a blessing for the whole world. All the nations of the world and all the creatures of the world. Even the animals of the world will be elevated by the Jews being in Israel. He says, thus it was in the time of wholeness when the temple stood. Wholeness really means connection of heaven and earth. So in the time when heaven and earth were connected because Jerusalem was lived by the Jewish people, he says, when the temple stood, this was a reality. When we offered regular sacrifices each day, because the sacrifices were every day, We were drawing all creatures near to God and joining them to God. That's what our purpose is, to link up creation with the Creator. Then were the nations also submissive. Also, the whole world was serving God, serving God's name. That's Jerusalem is called the faithful city. He says this refers to the whole world, because in those days, all creatures were drawn to their root. Svadamet by root means the root of life. The root of life is God. So this is really two teachings that in my feeling, and I've studied this book for 30 years, and I study it all the time. But these two teachings capture the essence of the idea that it's about lifting up reality to its divine source. And that's why we're sad that we're not, that's why we long for Jerusalem. That's why we believe that the Jewish people have to be in Jerusalem and have to have a holy temple that can reweave reality back to the Creator. So to finish, what I want to share for now, and then when we get back together, there'll be time for questions and thoughts. I know many people have a relationship with the book of Psalms, which were written by King David. Of course, it was King David who first captured Jerusalem, and his son Solomon who built the first temple. And he was a great warrior for Israel, and also a great teacher of Israel and a great poet of Israel. And he says this, a song of ascents of David. I rejoiced when they said to me, we are going to the house of the Lord. Our feet stood inside your gates, O Jerusalem. Jerusalem built up, a city knit together. This city knit together is really talking about knit together with God. It's a city that's united with God, to which tribes would make pilgrimage. This is what I just spoke about. All the tribes would make pilgrimage to Jerusalem. The tribes of the Lord, the tribes of Judah, the tribes of Jacob are called the tribes of the Lord, as was enjoined upon Israel to praise the name of the Lord. There the thrones of judgment stood. Israel was a place of great judgment, of great justice in the world. Thrones to the house of David. Now here we're going to end with this, because this is a prayer that I want to put out, that really all of us pray for the well-being of Jerusalem. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May those of you who love you be at peace. May those who love Jerusalem know peace. May there be well-being within your ramparts, peace in your citadels. For the sake of my kin and friends, I pray for your well-being. It's speaking about Jerusalem. I pray for the peace of Jerusalem, for the wholeness of Jerusalem. For the sake of the house of the Lord our God, I seek your good. So this is a beautiful, beautiful prayer. And I feel that especially during this week, where we're in a period that they're called 9 days. They're 9 days of particular preparation to commemorate the loss of the temples and all the tragedies that have happened to the Jewish people because they haven't been in their land. We really have to focus on prayer, and we have to focus on all of us, the whole world really, praying for peace in Jerusalem and praying for the goodness of Jerusalem. So I really ask you to join in this prayer as well, because it's a beautiful, beautiful prayer. So I think that's my overall idea that I wanted to share, Shirley. So I'm going to give this back to you, and then you'll take it forward, and you'll let me know when we're going to have questions. And so I'm going to make you host
Thank
now.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you. And it's interesting because on my content on the schedule, it says to share about loss, right? And this is how I feel, that I think, 200 years ago, when Jewish people commemorate Tisha B'Av, I think that was huge loss. That's huge loss, because they're outside of the land, looking in, do not know when God will bring them back. But it's that longing, it's that yearning. But now Jewish people are back. When we, at least for me, when I'm watching, Jewish people mourning and praying, I actually cannot feel that sense of tremendous loss, because the process of coming back has already started, and we already start to see the promise, God's promise, being fulfilled. And so, from just what Diane just said, it's actually, for me, it's kind of hard to feel that sense of loss. It's more sense of celebration in a way.
Anticipation.
And also tremendous anticipation. Yeah.
Shirley, can I say one thing about that?
Yes.
Can I just say one thing? I just
Sure.
have to jump in because I was talking to my daughter today about exactly what you just said.
Yeah.
And I said, I feel so much that now that we're in Jerusalem, I don't focus on these days as a time of sadness. I focus them on a time of the joy of
Right.
and of the future as well. So thank you. Okay, I just had to say that.
Exactly. So yeah, and I think so we're really living in a very, very special time because we get to see the time is changing, and later I'll talk more about this. But anyway, so as the spirit of Tisha B'Av is to mourn the exile, to the things that was lost during exile. But for an outsider, for me, when I look at Jewish people, I see that they gained actually quite a bit from the exile. And so I went back to search in the scripture, and then I suddenly understood what that exile was for. So in Jeremiah, y'all can see my screen now, right? Am I sharing? Yes, I am sharing. Okay. So in Jeremiah 9 and also Isaiah 48, and I think there are other places in the Bible, but I just picked out these two, is what God is saying is, he said, I will refine and test them. Them is Israel, is Jewish people. For what else can I do because of the sins of my people? So this is a formula that God is prescribing for them to deal with their sins, is to refine and test. And then later we'll see that ultimately there is a reconciliation, okay? And then in Isaiah 48, God says, for my own name's sake, I delay my wrath. This idea is also very interesting because if we go back to number 14, when Israelites didn't want to go into the land because they didn't believe God will make it happen for them. The Lord was angry and Lord wanted to wipe them out. And Moses pleaded for them. And he said, Lord, what about your name? What about your name? What about your reputation? If you wipe these people out, what other people say? What would the nations say? What would Egyptians say? That, Lord, you cannot do it? So he brought this, so he used quite a strategy to plead for the Israelites, for his own people, that, Lord, what about your reputation? So here, exactly the same thing. Lord says, for my own name's sake, for my reputation, I will delay my wrath. And for the sake of my praise, I hold it back from you so as not to destroy you completely. He says, see, I have refined you. Though not as silver, I have tested you in furnace of affliction. So for me, the exile is really the Lord put them in this furnace of affliction. And what did they get out? Right? Lord says, I refine you. And we know God is not a failure. And they are refined. So this is actually my teaching. I have never seen anyone teach this. So if you look at the New Old Testament to New Testament, if you do a comparison, you'll see that the people have changed. Because in the Old Testament, God kept complaining about how Israel worship idol. Okay, and because of that worship idol, he kicked them out. So the first exile to Babylon, to Assyria, to all those places. But in New Testament, you do not see idol worship at all. You never see once Jesus complained about idol worship. And he never told the disciples to go tear down the Asherah poles or the idols at the high places. So idol worship is no more. Okay? To me, it's very interesting that the people are refined. It's God's refining process. And also another thing that is very important is local synagogue system is established. When the first temple was burned, when they came back, they forgot about who God is. They didn't have the word. It was Ezra, Nehemiah, they found God's words and they read it. They wept, right? And so they changed the system. Instead of solely rely on the temple, this local synagogue system is established. And so this actually prepared them for the second exile. Okay, then if we look at from New Testament to now, that Jewish people went through 2,000 years of diaspora, that we saw a community, a real community was created through this diaspora. Because in the New Testament, we saw that they were killing each other. That's in history book, we saw that there are a lot of persecution within the Jewish people themselves. But now, for those of us, and for those of you who have visited Israel, the first thing you notice is it's like a big family. Even though now they come back from all over the world, and they come back with different background, with different sects in Judaism. Some of them are more secular, some of them more religious, some of them are ultra-Orthodox. If something happens, they all come together to help each other. And so that's, to me, is really amazing, even though they were separated for 2,000 years, and they could still come back as like a big family. So that's a huge thing that was changed through second diaspora. And also that we see compassion among the people. In New Testament, something that Jesus complained about over and over, that people were focusing on doing and they didn't recognize the spirit of the law. But now we see, if you know Jewish people better, or if you know how they practice, there's a lot of compassion within the halakha system. Halakha is the Jewish law system. So that's something that personally moved me when I live among Jews, and also their compassion towards foreigners, towards outsiders. That the Bible kept talking about. You need to be compassionate to the outsiders, because once upon a time you were a foreigner in Egypt, and you hear that preached a lot in the synagogues. So those are some things to me gained through the exiles, that Lord refined them, and so they were refined. They're changed through that refinement. Okay. All right. So I don't think we have a whole lot of time left. So I will jump into this. Actually, it's quite complicated. So I will try to talk about how interesting it is that exile happened in this way. Okay, which way is it I'm talking about? After they get the covenant. So first time they were redeemed. If we look at the Lord's Passover, they were redeemed out of Egypt, and when they arrived at Mount Sinai, it's the Shavuot, it's the Pentecost season, and they were redeemed into a relationship, which happened at Sinai. Why did God redeem them? Into what? I mean, redeem them, people need to do something, right? And so it was redeemed into a relationship with God. So at Mount Sinai, God fulfilled the promise to Abraham, that your descendants will be my people and I will be their God. So that relationship is sealed at Mount Sinai. And strangely, a year plus a few months later, out into the exile they go, into 40 years. And then 2,000 years ago, we see that as Christians, we believe that we are in the New Testament era, that through Christ's death and the resurrection, the new covenant has started. And of course, all of you who know me, I keep talking about this new covenant that is established with the people of Israel, and with the house of Judah, right? The house of Israel and the house of Judah. And it says, it will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt, because they broke my covenant, though I was a husband to them, declared the Lord. So we see the continuity between Mount Sinai to 2,000 years ago, that it's exactly with the same people. right? Even though they broke the covenant, God says, now I will make a new covenant with them. And then he says, then I will be their God and they will be my people. So through this, this is again ultimately happened through this new covenant, is that the same purpose. I will be their God and they'll be my people. So throughout the Bible, Diane talked about the land, a relationship with the people. And also another thing you see throughout the Bible is I will be their God and they will be my people. So all these events they go through that God bring Israel through is for this relationship. And when we talk about we Christians have a relationship with God, it comes from that. Okay, the earliest time, it comes from Abraham, from that God is willing to make a relationship with people and also seal that relationship with covenant. First time through, at Mount Sinai, and then 2,000 years ago on the cross, with the covenant that this relationship is sealed. And then again, another very, very important thing of the new covenant is the sin issue is resolved. God says, for I will forgive their wickedness and remember their sins no more. And so so that's why when Jesus said that for salvations from the Jews, and this is the reason, because the covenant that gives salvation is made with the Jews, okay? And then also right after Pentecost, right after that covenant happened, again, they went into exile, which to me is so interesting. It's so interesting. And this is also talked about by Jesus. He said, they will fall by the sword and will be taken as prisoners to all nations. And we know that happened. And the Jerusalem will be trampled on by Gentiles until the time of Gentiles are fulfilled. And so for 2,000 years is all wrapped in this tiny little sentence, because we know Jerusalem is no longer trampled by Gentiles. And so we know time is turning. Jews are back. And for those of you who live in Jerusalem, you know the Jerusalem Day, right? I convinced Namiko so much to drag her out to the Jerusalem Day. I said, you must see us. You must celebrate Jerusalem Day. And Jerusalem come back, is united, it is unified, only 53 years ago. So this is all brand new. These new things are happening in our lifetime. It is extremely exciting. Okay, then, so between Shavuot and the Day of Atonement and the Sukkot, in the middle is the exile. So after they come out of exile, if you think the time of atonement, Day of Atonement is really a time of reconciliation with God. After the sin is paid for, right? With the two goats, the scapegoat and the goat that took their sin. And it's reconciliation between the people and God. And after that reconciliation, they can go into Sukkah to celebrate Sukkot, which is really special time because when you celebrate Sukkot, you're sitting in that Sukkah away from the world. Actually, Sukkah is a thing that's away from the world. It's very plain. For those of you who has sat in a Sukkah before, it's very, very plain. It's made with, grass over your head and the sticks all around you and the fabrics that surround you. And when wind is blowing, it's very scary. You think this thing's gonna be blown away. And it's cold. You're outside, especially in the United States or Canada. By the time the Sukkot comes around, the weather gets cold. And that is the time when you're sitting in Sukkah, you and a God alone, away from world's comfort. And so after the exile, you come back, returning to the Lord. reconcile with the Lord, and have that faith in the Lord that you can sit in the sukkah with peace, with joy. So to me, the timeline of where the exile is in between the covenant and the reconciliation, it's very interesting. And also, if we look at Romans, what Paul talked about, what I meant to say is also when Israel is in exile, amazingly, the Gentiles are coming into the covenant through our faith, being grafted in. So to Paul, this is a huge mystery. Okay, this is a huge mystery. He said, I do not want you to be ignorant of this mystery, brothers and sisters, so that you may not be conceited. Conceited meaning that the Gentiles will puff up their egos and all that, which is exactly what the Christians actually did in 2,000 years. He said, Israel has experienced a hardening in part until the full number of Gentiles have come in. And in this way, all Israel will be saved. As it is written, and he quotes back to Jeremiah, the deliverer will, Jeremiah and Isaiah, the deliverer will come from Zion. He will turn godliness away from Jacob, and this is my covenant with them. I will turn their godlessness away from Jacob, and this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. So he went back to Jeremiah to say, there is a covenant for the Jewish people, and now the Gentiles are coming in. By God's grace, Gentiles are coming in. And so this is really, to me, an amazing plan. There's so much actually gained, believe it or not, through that 2,000 years of exile. Earlier we talked about Jewish people's refinement, and then for us Gentiles, we got to come in during this time. And we always hear, right, the windows closing, the window, and a lot of time church preach that. And we see from what Jesus said about the time of Gentiles, we know time of Gentiles getting short because Jerusalem has already gone back to Jewish hands, Jewish people, except that one tiny little portion, right? The Temple Mount, it's actually officially still under Jordan. So there's still a little time yet for us Gentiles, but time is getting short. All right, I will come back to this again when we do the class on Yom Kippur and also Sukkot, and also Rosh Hashanah, because this, to me, this is really God's plan, and now we can see the plan in action. 200 years ago, we probably couldn't, but now we can actually see how this thing will eventually come together. If we look at Zechariah 8, that's the future, that's the reconciliation of the Jewish people with God, and also the Gentiles coming in with God together, worship the Lord. So the scripture says, this is what Lord Almighty says, the fast of the 4th, 5th, Tisha B'Av is in 5th, 7th, Yom Kippur is in 7th, and the 10th is another fast that commemorate the siege of Jerusalem. Okay, so currently Jewish people do all these fasts in all these months. The Lord says, will become joyful and the glad occasions and the happy festivals for Judah, for the Jewish people. Therefore, love truth and the peace. This is what the Lord Almighty says. Many people and inhabitants of many cities will yet come, and the inhabitants of one city will go to another, saying, let us go at once to entreat the Lord and see the Lord Almighty. I myself am going. And these many people are the Gentile nations. And many people and the powerful nations will come to Jerusalem to seek the Lord. Earlier, Diane talked about Jerusalem, and here Jerusalem showed up again. It's not anywhere else but Jerusalem. To seek the Lord Almighty and to entreat him. This is what the Lord Almighty says. In those days, 10 Gentiles from all the language and nation will take firm hold of one Jew by the hand of his robe and say, let us go with you because we have heard that God is with you. So that is the future. So eventually we know all these fasting will become joy because God has a plan. And the amazing thing is earlier, Diane mentioned that before the foundation of earth, the Lord already has, God already has this love affair with Israel. Israel's already in God's mind. And the Christians also believe that, because if we look at John, Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 1, first thing he says, in the beginning is the Word. Word is, of course, God's. The Bible, God's will, God's plan, and the Word was with God. Okay, and so in the beginning of foundation of the earth, God's words, God's will is already there. John said that very clearly, which is very cool. There is no plan B, right? This plan is already created in the beginning. And so I always say the book of Revelation, the last book in the Christian scripture, it's already written. We already know the end. The plan is already there. And so we know it will happen because of who God is, his faithfulness. Okay, and I know we are short on time. So the commemoration, actually a lot of this you can find online. Actually, Jewish people start the observance 3 weeks ago already. Not just on the 9th of Av, it's actually started 3 weeks ago already to commemorate Jerusalem wall was breached, and they already start the mourning period. No wedding during these 3 weeks, no celebration. It's pretty easy right now because of Corona, and people actually do not get haircuts. And every Shabbat, Jewish people read an affliction, and I put down the verse. And later I'll send this to you guys, and so you can see. On 9th of Av, fasting, 25 hours of fasting, and the congregation will get together to read Book of Lamentation. They will sit on the floor. No Torah study. Torah study is considered as a joy, so no Torah study on that day. In Israel, all the restaurants and entertainment will be closed. You will not find any restaurants open, and also no TV. If you turn the TV on, there is no TV. So you know how serious this is for the Jewish people. And after 9th of Av, then it's the time for consolation, time for comfort. And so they read comforting scriptures, and then all the way leading up to the Feast of Trumpet and Day of Atonement. And the repentance starts. That whole reconciliation with the Lord starts. So to me, it's there's quite a lot of amazing things in Judaism that has a very sophisticated system to connect the people with God's words. And this is one example that shows that all the scriptures they pick to tie people to God's purpose, to God's timing also. That's through these scriptures of the 3 affliction and the 7 consolations and repentance, and going through these timing. And so when the holiday gets close, when time gets close, I will send these scriptures out, and then you can also look at them. This is the eve of Tisha B'Av. People read together Book of Lamentation. The background, of course, is the old city, and different groups reading together. And it's a very moving moment. You can hear the reading throughout the city. You go out, you walk on the street, you can hear the reading of Lamentation. And so Jewish memory is an amazing thing. So I don't actually have, So I will just point this out, go through this slide so that when I send it to you, you know what's in the slide. So this is a story about a legend, kind of a story about Napoleon discovering Tisha B'Av. And he observed the Jews in France. And he asked, what are they mourning about? And the people told them they're mourning for this temple that was burned 1,700 years ago. And Napoleon was very impressed. He said, if Jews are still crying after all these years, if they still remember after all these years, he said, I'm sure Jews will endure. He said they will return, their temple will be rebuilt. And too bad he's not alive today to see it. But so what another part I want to talk about, it was in my original plan, was to talk about, unfortunately, Christians' role in bringing that furnace of affliction to the Jewish people. The expulsion, so they were kicked out of the land, but then the Christian Europe countries continue to expel them, kick them around. If they don't convert to Christianity, then they get expelled. And there's systematic oppression, persecution, riots, the pogrom, killing of Jews. And unfortunately, it happened mostly in the Christian Europe. I want to suggest a movie. Everybody has time to watch a lot of things now. Merchant of Venice. And Shakespeare wrote this. You can get a very good sense of the relationship between Christian Jews in the 1600s, 1500s, 1600s, during Shakespeare time. He wrote it very well. And the movie was very well done by Al Pacino and Jeremy Irons. So why should Christians care about this day? Of course, because we took part. Not we personally, but Christians in the past brought that furnace of affliction to Jews for almost 2,000 years. And it left a huge black mark on Christianity. And so we need to do something today to bring about a new history, right? To bring about a new history of our relationship with the Jewish people. And also another thing is the nation will be judged. If we look at Joel chapter 3, so you can read it later, that the Lord will judge the nation based on how they treated Israel. The Lord says that, they scattered my people among the nations. So it's a continuous scattering. If you look at the map, or if you saw the map earlier, that they were kicked around in the nations from France, from Spain, eventually from Portugal, from all these countries. Okay, I will let you read that. Stand solidarity with the Jewish people. If you're in Jerusalem, I believe our community, Mizmor David, they read Lamentation on the Tayelet. So if you let me know if you're interested, I can tell you when you can go there to join them. It's a very friendly community. And also, if you're interested, we can host a reading of Book of Lamentation. And it will be really wonderful if all the different languages can participate. Each language can take a chapter, and then the last chapter can be read by someone from Jerusalem in Hebrew to close that off, to show our stand with the Jewish people. And also, there's a movement among Christians called 9-av.com, and they're hosting a 8-hour repentance prayer. So you're welcome to join that. So if you would like to participate in the reading of Book of Lamentation, please let me know today or tomorrow so I can make the arrangements. I think it'll be very good to actually go through that experience alongside of Jewish people. And the one thing I noticed that when Jewish people when they read, it is very personal, because God says, you did this, and he's talking to the people of Israel. It's quite different from when we read it. When we read it, it's, oh, Jews did that, or, people of Israel did that, look at what they did, right? But when they read it, it's a very personal experience. So to me, it's a very amazing observation if we can read with them alongside and you can actually feel how they feel. Okay, so to end, I want to just show you what happens in synagogue in the era of the eve of Tisha B'Av, when they were reading Lamentation. So this scene, I finally found it on the internet, that this is towards the end of the reading, at the end of Lamentation, chapter 5, the last couple sentences is to ask God, says, turn us back to you, O Lord, so we may return and renew our days as of old. And when Jews read that line, they sing. They start singing, and it's a very moving singing. And so I actually put subtitle in here. So this group, they're in the synagogue, sitting on the floor, praying and the reading, and also singing. And so before they actually get to that verse, there's a huge leading, and it's about a minute, and then you'll see my subtitle. Okay. And so after this, I please unmute yourself, and please share your comments and also questions if you have any. And this video is about I think about 2 minutes. So I will stop sharing, and we can actually talk about that song for hours. Okay, the whole renew as of day of old is tremendously profound. But for another time, we want to do these class at least once a month, and I will invite different Jewish teachers to share, so we can hear a little Jewish perspective, and also I'll teach some, and so we'll have more opportunity to go back to these themes, because these themes occur over and over and over again in the Bible, especially when we talk about the holidays and all these things. And so we will definitely hit back to these themes again. So please unmute yourself, and if you have questions, any comments, more questions, comments?
Thank you for all the time and effort and taking on the technology and sharing and anyway, for encouraging us to read Lamentations and to pray for the peace of Jerusalem and that the virus will end and we can all go back because our hearts are there.
Yes. And if you're interested in reading it together through Zoom, let me know. Let me know so I can set something up among the group. Anything else? Okay, if there's nothing else, we will stop here, and maybe I will make a group for us. I guess not everybody's on. No, actually, probably difficult because everybody's on different social media. I don't know. We'll find a way, and so I can notify our future classes. Okay.
Thank you, Shirley. Thank you, Shirley.
Thank you so much. You guys in Japan, China, Laila Tov. Have a good night. Bye. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Diane.
You're welcome. Laila Tov from Jerusalem.